So, why did direct instruction come up recently?
So, um, I was having a conversation to do with voice training with someone,
Uh-huh.
um, and it was very much reinforcing the exact same thing that you noticed last week. We were having our conversation. Everything was in the throat and the this and the that, and there was a right and wrong way to do it. And it was like, you need to position your tongue in this way. You need to position this in that way. You need to work in this way and that. I'm just like going, okay, but I almost like, yes, but. And it was at the end of the conversation, I was like, it feels like I'm getting caught up in the exercises. But once I start putting everything together, it will become, well, more relative to what I'm actually trying to achieve. And the reaction was, yeah, yeah, probably will be, probably will be. I mean, you won't have it down at this point. And I'm like, I know, because I've not actually been practicing yet. Like, it's exercises that I'm doing, which I do get to a certain degree, but equally, I'm like, okay, cool. So this is being taught with a traditional approach, hands down, step by step guide, do it this way, it will work. And I'm like, okay, cool. I like it from a point of I know where to attune my attention to, but also the places that I'm attuning my attention is a little bit um amalgamous. It's a little bit like position your tongue in this way, and I'm like, why? Which is always the question I end up having. It's like, well, why? Oh, because of this part of your throat, and this part of your throat, and this part of your throat does this thing, and this part. Like, yeah, but I can't fully control. Like, it's going to take time to figure out how the best way to control that. I was like, okay, cool. How can I take the direct instruction and traditional approach to doing things and how could I flip it on its head? How
What,
could
what
I,
do you mean by flip it on its head? Are you trying to change what you're being instructed to do?
well, not necessarily change what I'm being instructed to do, but base it ecologically instead, and whether that's actually possible for me to have ecological instruction versus direct, like, this is where you put your tongue. Practice putting your tongue in this position. How can I practice this in a way that is how could I have more representative practice versus having a practice routine that is based on exercises and drills?
A couple of semantical things first. A drill can be a practice
Mm,
because a traditional drill is a highly constrained type of practice, which is still ecologically valid because it's
mhm.
just highly constrained. So a drill isn't not ecological. It's just that once you're competent enough at achieving or solving the problem or achieving the movement or whatever it is, behavior that you're trying to achieve, then you would move on rather than trying to perfect whatever that means, depending on the measure,
Yeah.
that drill or that
Hmm.
exercise. So once you are competent enough at solving the problem, move on and add complexity rather than trying to perfect it. That's where the drill element, I think, gets lost a little bit from traditional approaches because you have to get this right before you can move on. Not
Yeah.
quite so. Uh, then the other thing that I would sort of semantically add on to that with regards to direct instruction is that there are lots of different ways to, or there are lots of different meanings behind direct instruction. Teachers will argue back and forth what direct instruction is and isn't. At the end of the day, if someone is telling you something to do, it might be direct instruction, but the reasons why could differ. So someone could ecologically be giving you a direct instruction as
Mm.
part of a challenge, as part of the problem for you to solve. So a direct instruction from me on a trampoline would be somersault over this noodle, this pool noodle. Like that is a direct instruction, somersault over this pool noodle. But I'm not directly instructing parts of their body. I'm not saying
Mm,
you need to put your arms up when you do the somersault. So the direct instruction is used for different reasons. So the direct instruction itself isn't ecological or traditional. It's just a way at which we can categorize something that we've said, which is why I don't like using the terms, which is what I found interesting when you mentioned it. So the instruction that's being given to you at the moment sounds like the reasoning behind it comes from the assumption that once you can do these isolated skills, you can
hmm
put them together into this holistic skill. That assumption is from traditional approaches, which is what I personally would disagree with, because they are two isolated skills. If you learn to throw the ball with your left hand and then throw the ball with your right hand, that doesn't suddenly mean you can now juggle two balls with both hands at the same time because they're two isolated skills. And that's the way I would view the instructions currently being given to you. I'm not saying
mm,
they're wrong. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying I think that it would be more effective if you were given a goal, a problem to solve that's more representative of the end behavior, i.e., speaking the way that you want to speak.
mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's quite interesting to, because there are aspects of it where it's like, oh, how do you, they do ask the question of like, how does that feel? How does that feel in like in your body versus it being this is where you're supposed to position it?
The question, how does that feel, sounds the
Oh,
same, but the intention behind it will be different,
but there was one experience in that conversation where I did not give the answer that they were looking for,
right? What
which
happened?
was which was really interesting. It's like, okay, yeah, yeah. What else did you feel? What else did you feel? What else did you feel? And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm just trying to find other things. And they were like, did you feel this? I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. That was here and all of this stuff. And yeah, 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 I felt that. But that wasn't where my attention
Attention.
was focused. It was really interesting. It was such an interesting experience of like, huh, I had to give a right answer here. That explains why I had so many blocks on the first week, as I expressed last week. I was so like worried to do it because I was going to do it wrong, which is not the intention of the person doing it, but it's just the language being there is a right answer, there is a correct response and an incorrect response, or a not detailed enough response, or a there is a certain focus that I need to put my attention on that I don't know. Which meant for me as the learner, as I was going through my practice, I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking for because my instructor isn't there to tell me what I'm looking for. And so now I'm stuck in a position where I actually did practice last week and it was like, oh, well, yeah, I see where you're going and this is not, did this feel really straining? Did this feel like this? And actually what I was doing is I was more whispering, which was not helpful and actually just did more damage to my throat and my vocal cords because I was whispering too much.
I want to challenge that point. Damage to your throat, because that's a fear metric.
Well, the damage, it is harder.
You chose to use that word,
I did.
and I'm assuming the teacher has also used that word.
Not,
Harsh on
yeah,
your throat.
harsh and
Yeah,
yeah, harsh. That was yes, yeah,
harsh, hard, like those words which could be associated with damage.
damage, yeah,
And for me, that is where the teacher's language or the coach's language, whatever they call themselves, their language, because of the meaning behind it, adds assumptions with the way the person feels about the practice,
mm,
which adds fear.
mm,
When we spoke after the call last week, I mentioned that you come across as if you're fearful of making mistakes. But
yeah,
the fact that you've just said damage makes me think, oh, okay, there's another element of this.
mm,
So, what is the damage that could happen? Your throat gets sore, I assume. So, when I think about that from any other physical standpoint, you go to the gym, you walk down the street for the first time in forever. Whatever it is, you damage your body and then it
yeah,
heals because you're
yeah,
doing something different.
yeah,
So the damage is actually useful. It's
Mm,
beneficial because it helps as part of the training.
mm.
Unless that's explained or encouraged or isn't shown as a way that's negative, we will be fearful because damage a lot of the time is seen as fearful.
Yeah,
I, unless the person is recognizing that, which is what I would argue a coach with expertise does, they recognize the potential affordances others are perceiving, and drawing attention to specifying information that is more useful, i.e., oh, it's damaging. But that's beneficial. The but that's beneficial actually changes a lot about the dynamic of the
yeah.
practice.
It was interesting because I actually shared the fear
Okay.
in that conversation with them. I was like, yeah, I got really worried about doing it. Like I got really uncomfortable with doing it. I was trying to do it correctly, and I was so focused on the exercises that it was actually at a detriment to the way I was trying to engage with the work.
Hmm.
And the first question was, okay, cool. Let's hear where you're at, which was, of course, absolutely terrifying, and they could tell. Um, and that was like, okay, cool. Let's. And what happened was is that we removed. So I am everything that I do is on a B3 note, as it's to raise the kind of pitch, which is very one small aspect of it. And so it was like, okay, let's remove the pitch and just try breathing through it. Try breathing through because what we're doing is open quotient, which is basically breathiness.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's what we were working on. I said, let's remove the pitch and see what happens. Like, try breathing on. I'm just like, huh, see, something about that instruction felt very different. Just breathe through, like, breathe through the words, feel the floatiness of it. And it was less, well, not direct instruct, but less like constrained instruction and more feel the breath. It was more about the feeling versus the what I have to do with the body
Feeling the breath of what? Because obviously I can feel the breath breathing. Feeling the breath
as I'm
to what?
speaking.
As you, so what did you need to like? What was the goal of the exercise apart from feeling the breath? Because that's an internal focus.
So it was basically adding breathiness into my voice. So as I'm speaking, there is a breathiness is more coming out of the voice.
So could I summarize it by saying, can you speak with more breath?
Yes, it was speak with a sigh, which
Okay.
once that was used, it was like, oh, okay, this is actually a little bit simpler than I thought it was.
And that to me is an ecologically driven problem
Mm.
because there is a problem that has an obvious output, outcome, solution, behavior, and you have to find a way to make that happen. And
Mm.
you are then given the comparison of was that more or less of where I wanted to go to hit the goal?
Yeah.
And you have that feedback. You have your own feedback. You're not relying on someone else to give you the feedback.
And very harshly criticizing the coach right now, but at the same time, I did perceive there was some of that in there. Not much, but there was like, okay, cool. How it like it was. How do you feel about this? What was different about? They were asking that question, but I was like, okay, cool. This is what I'm going to zoom in on. Like this is where my attention will be. This is where I'm going to focus my attention on that of the feeling.
I'm curious, how did you feel when they were asking the question?
Which one? The question.
About the question, like how did that feel? Did that feel like normal, okay, annoying?
Um, I didn't have the answer at first
So a little
because
bit
I
frustrating?
wasn't a little bit frustrating. Yeah, a little bit frustrating. I was also thinking, what is the correct answer here at first? Because there must be a correct answer because so far in our experiences, there is the answer I'm supposed to give and the answer that I'm actually experiencing. So where do you want me to look at?
Yep. Yep.
Which in the end, I just stopped. I'm just like, okay, cool. I am here to experience all of this. So I'm just going to share everything that I'm feeling. and that'll be fine because I'm learning through this experience because I am ecologically exploring it. And it was almost not necessarily like a flick of the switch. It was like, okay, cool. Right, I know I'm being asked right now. How do I use the ecological approach to help me on like to help me figure this out instead of waiting for my the person who's helping me to actually tell me it's right or wrong. It's like, what am I looking for? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Okay, then when there was a demonstration stuff, what do I hear? What do I sense? Like what is it that I'm liking about this, not liking about that? And it became easier to go through that experience once I let go of the exact position of my tongue and moved into because we were doing resonance. And so I was like, okay, cool. What does it feel like? Oh, I feel like a bubble under my tongue. Okay, move the bubble around. What does that look? I'm like, okay, cool. I'll move the bubble around. What does that do? Oh, it makes it darker here and lighter there. And it was interesting from a point of like, what is going on with my voice?
To me, it sounds like the setup situation, like the relationship you had, like in academia, the stuff that I read would be coach-athlete relationship. So maybe teacher-athlete or teach-student, whatever. Um, the relationship was set up very traditionally,
Yes.
and you're trying to shift it to be more athlete-centered or
Yeah. And as I
teacher.
was as I was listening to what you were saying, it's like, ah, cool. I'm going to do my best to not make assumptions. Or when I'm making those assumptions, I'm going to ask a question instead of assuming. Because I do often take those shortcuts, like of
Most people
like,
do.
okay, cool. Yeah, most people do. And so I'm going to be like, okay, cool. What do you mean by this? Or like ask more questions. Um, because often at the end of the sessions, that's what I get. So, do you have any questions? I'm like, no, not really, because I don't really know what to ask until I'm doing the thing.
Mm.
So that's something that I'm gonna like explore more on from my own practice. And it's fun because this is the first time I've used ecological kind of philosophy, psychology in a physical sense, using the label for
Yeah.
clarity than anything else. But it was interesting to use it in a physicality because I've not really used it in that way myself.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting.
Some when you were talking about the question, something that I was started thinking about from last Friday was I was when I support back somersaults, I have a belt around the individual to make sure they don't fly off the trampoline or anything, and my hands on their shoulder. And when they go round, their legs go together forwards, obviously because they're rotating backwards. And sometimes I put my arm underneath their legs and move them round. Sometimes it's on their back or whatever I can get hold of, just to make sure they don't land on their head. And as they're going round, after two or three, I ask them, "Did you feel me touching you?" And most of the time, actually, I don't think I've had an experience when I asked that question first time where someone knows yes or no. But just
Mm.
me asking the question brings their attention to it. And then they'll go round again. I will make sure once I've asked the question, I help them round on the next one, even if they don't need it. Um, and then I'll ask the question again. And on Friday, the boy that I was working with, the first three, I helped him round. He was starting to get there on his own, and he was like, "Nope, nope." The last two was like, "No, I didn't feel anything." Then I didn't touch him, and he said, "No, you definitely didn't touch me that time." And he knew.
Ah, that's so interesting.
So the previous ones, he thought I wasn't touching him. I was, but he hadn't noticed that it was me the whole time because I was always there. But what he did notice is when I wasn't there.
Current futures.
Exactly. And so me just stepping away made him realize, actually, yeah, you're helping me. And after that, again, I didn't help him round because he didn't really need it at that point, and he was doing it by himself. So I asked him, "Do you want me to take the belt off?" Yeah, okay. And we progressed. So I basically went from having a hand on his shoulder and a belt to just hand on the shoulder counting to standing by the side of the trampoline, stepping in when he lands, to pushing in a mat, to him doing it by himself. We did all that in 20 minutes.
Hmm.
Uh, so the information that he was paying attention to, it's not that he wasn't paying attention to it at all. It's the comparison that he had wasn't attuned enough. He wasn't paying attention to everything that was going on enough for him to give a verbal explanation. But I knew he was paying attention because you have to be paying attention because you're an organism. Uh, and another similar situation with questions, one of the ladies that I coach, she was twisting in a back somersault, which you don't really want to do. And so I asked her, "What are you looking at?" And she said, "Oh, my eyes are closed." And I said, "Well, you're probably seeing something at some point. So let me know what you see." And she went round, she went, "Oh, well, I see the blue thing." So, "Oh, okay, what else do you see?" "Oh, my eyes are closed." "Okay, well, see if you can see anything else." So she went round again. She was like, "Oh, no, 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 actually, I look at the basketball hoop." It's like, so you go from blue, which is right in front of her, to the basketball hoop, which is slightly like diagonally skewed, and then you go round. She goes, "Yes." "And what way do you? Oh, I face the So she realized that facing the basketball hoop triggered the twist because she's now making her movement, her behavior, twist to get to the basketball hoop to go round. So she was looking, but when I initially asked the question, she said, "Oh no, I do it with my eyes closed." Well, she can't do it
Mm.
with her eyes closed if she's looking at the basketball hoop, which is making her skewed. And so when people answer my questions, I mean it's going to sound harsh. I don't really listen to the response because I'm not that worried about the response. I'm worried about what they're going to do with the question and change their behavior afterwards because now they're paying attention to something different. And this is something part of the feedback that I got on my level two is my questioning was too closed because I was asking them about did that feel better or worse? And then the person was saying, "Oh, it felt better because blah blah blah," or "It felt worse because blah blah." I don't actually care what their answer was. I care what they do next time. If I give them
Oh,
an
they
open,
focus on. Yeah.
yeah, if I give them an open question, how did that feel with a somersault? They could go any direction with it. But if I want them to pay attention to something in specific, I need to narrow down my question so they're paying attention to that sort of information, whether it is their feet, their shoulders, their hips, or something. If I say something very broad, then their focus could be on their arms, then the next skill focus on their legs, the next skill focus on their hips. But I have a goal, I have an intention for them and their attention. Uh, and so my question, like I say, isn't really for the answer. It's for the attention and intention. Sometimes an
Mm.
answer is given, I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." It gives me more information about what they're paying attention to, but it's not an answer to the solution because it's abstract. And
Mm.
so when your teacher is asking you questions, I have a feeling they're looking for an answer, as
Yeah.
in they're looking for an answer to the question that they have that they're looking for you to be paying attention at.
Yes.
But just because you can't articulate the answer that they want doesn't mean you're not doing what they want.
That's exactly what happened. It's like, well, where was it positioned? So we were doing so regarding the tongue and moving the tongue forward to add more resonance. And when it happened, there was a darkness in the voice, which we wanted to work at.
See that terminology, I just get rid of it.
And
It's just not needed. Like, describe the behavior, because for anyone that's outside of that conversation, they'll probably get lost,
yeah,
including me. And I can't relate to that word. I don't know what that word means. When you say it feels darker, I have a better understanding of what it might
mm.
mean. But what is the behavior? Did the voice go shallow? Did it go high? Did it go quiet? Did it go loud? Like, what was the change in behavior
So
when
the
you?
the 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 aim of the behavior is a more nasally voice. That's how I probably would use it. That's
Yep.
what resonance is, a nasally feeling towards it, um, to the voice. And so that's what we were working on.
Right.
And there was a question it's like, oh, what do you feel when you move forward, just going "Nyeh," like that? And then it was like, oh, I felt this, 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 and this. Okay, anything else? And I was being, there was something I didn't see
You were
or
missing
didn't.
something.
I was missing something, and they were like, "Oh, did you see that?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, 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 of course I did. It was back here and it's all here. Yeah, exactly." And I'm like,
Yeah, I know.
and it was a jarring experience. It was like, "Oh, you weren't looking for the rest of the stuff I was saying." Okay, then what is the point of the question?
Yes.
If the because as soon as like they said what the thing I was supposed to listen for. Oh yeah, 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 it's here, and it was moving up here, and here is a little bit of space here, and it's like a little bit of the blah 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 blah. They're like, yeah, exactly. I'm like, yeah, but I already. That's not what I'm focused on. Like I'm here because I am moving my tongue around.
Yeah. There was a so we've got a couple of girls that are doing a schools competition, and I was asked. Some of them are looking for obviously performance feedback. And trampoline is very particular in judging. Like you're looking at the smallest of angles to create zero point 0.1 deductions here and there and everywhere. Um, and what I was asking an individual to do, I was saying top when they're at the top of their jump. And the goal of the practice was when you're at the top, I want you to be in a pencil shape, like straight shape, arms up, pencil shape. Once you're there, do the shape, whether it's a tuck, a pike, a straddle, legs apart, legs together, those sorts of things. And so I was saying top, and that's all I was doing. All I was doing was saying top. They'd get to the top, and then they'd try and work out when to move their body. And I then asked them, probably about 10, 15 minutes into the session of them exploring these movements and things. I said, how does the jumping feel? Deliberately being open. They said it feels off balance. It feels a bit weird. I was like, oh, okay. Is it higher or lower or about the same height? And he said, oh no, it's definitely higher. I'm like, yeah, but I didn't ask you to go higher. And she sort of looked at me and she was like, it's a good point. Because she's struggling to do these skills that she can do. A tuck jump, a pike jump, a straddle jump. They're fairly simple skills for her at this point, but she's struggling to do them doing this top exercise. Because I'm asking
Top,
her, sorry?
top.
Yeah.
I mean, high as possible. That's the. Oh, that's so interesting.
So I haven't asked her to go higher. I'm just saying top when she's at the top of her jump. But she's deliberately pushing it higher, waiting for another top. Now, that wasn't me encouraging her to do it. She has chosen to do that. Why? I don't know. It tends to happen though. But I think it's because it's easier to feel a top when the weightlessness at the top of the jump is there. So she's
Mm.
deliberately made the entire skill harder to try and achieve the problem. Because to make the top bit easier, you need more time. To have the time to get the shape in after the top, you need more time to come down. And that's what she figured out on her own. When she was low and I was saying top, she was like, yeah, but I can't get into my shape now. So she was she was making it harder by jumping higher because it's now a new skill, but she was making the goal easier. That's what I wanted. I wanted her to go higher so she could reach up, get to the top, and then come down and do the shape. And all of that, she figured all of that out on her own by me just saying top for about 10 minutes. I didn't have to tell her. You need to bend your knees, you have to push with your ankles, you need to push with your hips, you need to drive with your arms up in front of you. Then when you're at the top, you need to wait, and then you need to brace in your stomach. Then when you come down, I didn't have to say any of that. Then with the shape jump, I didn't have to say when your arms are at the top and you've waited at the top and you've extended your shoulders up and you've braced in. Now you need to drive into the shape, and once you're into the shape, you need to be snappy. I didn't need to say any of that. All I did was say I'm going to say top when you're at the top of your jump. And the rest of the mechanics figured themselves out. They emerged through the problem. And when I hear your story about learning, I'm asking myself, why can't the teacher give you something like that, a goal, a problem to focus on, and let you figure it out? Because no, the girl that I was working with didn't manage to get it perfect. But her routine, her entire routine, other skills included, was higher. She was driving up into skills, which aesthetically for trampoline looks better for scores. And the shape jumps were getting into the shape far cleaner because she had more time to do it.
Mm.
But I hadn't worked on any of those things. I hadn't even touched swivel hips, backline. I hadn't touched any of those. But because of me saying top, she found out solutions to other things that she didn't realize she was struggling with.
Mm,
And I feel that could help with your speaking because there are probably elements of the movements that you're doing, the behaviors that you're doing that are problems. The teacher may recognize you've got those problems, but they don't want to work on those right now because have to get this bit first. But maybe you're struggling because you're doing something that you don't know you're doing.
mm,
And the constrained practice, drill, the constrained practice isn't letting you explore those mistakes
mm.
because they're
And
not mistakes.
they are isolated skills. It is we're working on this week and this week and this week. It's one component of all of it together. And for me, like my goal-directed behavior is to have a feminized voice.
A
And
what
if I
voice?
take away a
Thermalized.
feminized,
Oh, feminine. I
feminized,
thought you said thermonized. I was like, what?
that sounds cool.
Thermite?
Is to have a feminized voice, which, you know, is subjective in its own way, but also it's like, oh, I need to have this component and then this component. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to start combining it all now
Hmm.
because that's the problem I want to solve, because that's the bit I'm interested in.
Yep.
And so some of my practice this week is actually going to be playing with both a little bit of drills because on reflection of what you're saying, yeah, probably would be helpful to do some of these drills because they are very specific practice to get the hang of these things and understand them on a basic level, and then try playing with it.
To an extent, yeah. I when it comes to the drill, depending on how isolated it is, I would try and reduce the amount of time spent on it. Like,
Yeah,
but obviously, I don't know the specifics and your learning expertise, etc., 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 etc. But yeah, to
I
be
don't enjoy
honest,
drill. I've never enjoyed drills
no,
ever because,
but
and I don't know anyone. Actually, come to think of it, I don't know anyone who would like drills. Frankly,
the people that like the drills are the people that are good at the drills because they've done the
Mm,
drills lots, most of the time.
mm.
The way I see it is when kids turn up to trampoline, one of the first things some of them say is, I want to learn to flip. So what do I get them doing? I get them doing a flip because that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
Like, am I going to put them 2 meters in the air with me jumping and then double kipping them round to like land on their face? No. I'm going to simplify the task. They're going to do a forward roll. If they can do that, then we'll do a forward roll bounce in a little bit, and then they're going to jump over a noodle hoop, a pool noodle. Like, I'm going to simplify the flip so they get to experience the flip there, like straight away. It's not fiddling around. My dad said the other day that he doesn't think he's seen many other trampoline clubs with so many people flipping. Like, no, because they go through the BG levels. You have to do the seat landing, the front landing, the back landing, the half twist, the forward twist, the half twist, the seat landing, the swivel hips. Before you can do the front somersault, I'm like, why? Why? And and for you, I would see it the same. Like if you want to speak in a feminine voice, try and speak in a feminine voice, but task simplified. So instead of
Mm.
doing, I don't know, a whole talk, a couple of words, can you make
Yeah.
it sound more feminine than other words? And I would even go as far, this could sound a bit odd, as far to say, can you make the word sound as masculine as possible?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's emphasizing all of the errors, errors in terms of ecological errors, not as in mistakes. That's wrong. But it's emphasizing the pieces of information that you want to attune to, but in the opposite direction.
Even just, I'm not even doing it, but I'm actually thinking about it. Like now.
Mm.
And I'm already just going, oh, yeah. So I feel, I'm more talking here. Whereas I remember when I'm using the feminized voice, it's up here. So there is that like movement. There's a hop, which I
Mhm.
keep saying. That's so interesting. Yeah.
It works in sport. It's got to work in everything else because this is ecologically driven. Well, it doesn't have to. Obviously, we need studies to prove it and empirical evidence, blah blah blah. But
It's so limited in scope.
ugh, yes, yes. Well, no, kind of. It's the way I would describe the limited scope is when you take a highly broad philosophical view at any scientific principle, it's going to be limited in scope. That's the way that I view it. Um, and every idea has limitation. Where I feel the ecological limitation may be is with those trying to explain ecological terms. Um, how do I word it? It's like the limitation in ecological psychology is when you're trying to explain situations using other terminology,
Yeah,
and not embracing all of the other terminology that's embraced within ecological psychology. Like dynamical systems theory isn't not ecological psychology. It's the same way maths isn't not English. Like maths is in English. It's just we categorize math in this certain way with numbers. Well, English is also numbers because E is a representation of numbers because they're symbolic. So when I describe ecological psychology, it's a linguistic heuristic to help explain certain ideas, but it doesn't mean it's not other ideas. And if we go all the way out where everything is everything, and then it makes it redundant, I think
yeah.
it's solipsism. Like where well, I don't know if that's how you actually say it. That's how I pronounce it. Solipsism, which is in the first part of the Introduction to Ecological Psychology book. it, maybe there isn't an internal world. Maybe there is an internal world. Maybe you just say, no, we are perceiving. We are perceiving. Everyone is perceiving. Yeah, great, cool. How do you study that? You can't. You can't study solipsism. It's not possible because it's all abstract. There's no way to test something because it's all broad and abstract. Yes, you're right, but you're also wrong because you can't prove it. So the only way to prove it is to add some measures. Adding some measures brings in indirect or direct perception with the way that you try and test things. So yeah, and that's where I think the limitations are with ecological psychology, but that's not a limitation with ecological psychology. That's a limitation with everything that has a measured metric in, which is science, which is where science and philosophy butt heads because you can't test. It's same with quantum mechanics, quantum physics, everything in the quantum realm has a measure. As soon as you move out of the measure and you start to abstract everything, you lose the measures. And if you lose the measures, now you're speaking abstractly and using semantics and linguistics, but linguistics have different meanings, which to me reduces usefulness.
Mm.
I don't know how you could use words to describe something if the behavior isn't measurable in some way. And yes, adding measures is limiting, but it's the only way that we can find something that can be tested because you can't test without a measure. Can't say that's more effective than that if you don't have a number or a value or a behavior or an outcome to say yes or no from. That's my view. What are your thoughts?
I think pretty much the same. It's so easy to get caught in the philosophical discussions around ecological psychology and just life. But when it comes to just the practical application, perception and action basically sums up most things.
Yeah.
And so that's the that kind of just we don't need more labels because they are so redundant and they are so context sensitive. They are so like it depends on what your intention is. If your intention is to explore a topic, then fine, use them as a measure. But when it comes to the day-to-day life, I can get by with just perception and action that are coupled. Yay! And then when
What
you start layering on other things, it just becomes
I think in the broad sense of like solipsism and philosophy that's like similar, the action wouldn't be needed. So they're reducing labels. They're reducing labels so much that everything is everything, or everything could be everything, which obviously is not wrong, but I don't think that's useful. We use action as a way to distinguish between perceiving, processes throughout perceiving and action. And the way that, like, yes, I would agree, action is part of perception. But when we're talking about measuring metrics, how do you measure perception? Well, there are action elements that can be detectable via other organisms, and there are other pieces of information that are less detectable or undetectable currently because of the equipment that we have, which could be part of perception, or we would argue is part of perception. And so, separating perception and action in science for measuring outputs is required. Like, yes, I would categorize everything ecologically as, yeah, you're perceiving. Even though I'm acting, I am perceiving. I can categorize it as just perceiving. I don't need the action bit in there. But if I'm going to add a metric or a measure or an output or a goal, there needs to be something that is measurable for it to be scientific and for us to use it in some way. Detectable information. That's other organisms perceiving, whether that's an agent or whatever else you want to describe it as. And a question that I think relates to this very well, which I've seen in the Discord that was posted recently. They Peter said, "Do you already?" I assume that's meant to be find second language. Understand it. Do you already, or did you already find out how to use ecological psychology to teach ecological psychology? And to me, there is an assumption in that question which potentially leads to a misunderstanding of what we meant when we were talking about using ecological psychology to explain ecological psychology to other people. We are using ecological psychology whenever we talk. Because ecological psychology isn't something you do or you don't do. It's a way that we would explain our actions. And so we're already doing it. We're already using it. Everyone is using it. It's how we do it more effectively. So I would rephrase the question: how can we be more effective with our explanations in ecological psychology? But in the conversation, we use ecological psychology as a way to categorize the behaviors because we need a way to measure the metric. Otherwise, I would just say, how can we be more effective with our practice? One way to do that is I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do, and this is why you need to do it like this, because direct perception is the way you do it. That is a way that could be more effective in my practice. But it's a way that could be more effective in a more traditional sense using those assumptions, which is something that we don't want to focus on. So I'm paying attention to ecological psychology instead of traditional views. And so that's why I use the words to bring a measure, bring a metric, bring some constraints and limitations through language to explain the behaviors that I'm using. So I would still explain traditional approaches ecologically. You can, and we have done, as like we mentioned earlier. The practice, a highly constrained practice, is an ecological explanation to a drill, direct instruction, as mentioned earlier. Uh, so the ecological psychology is a metric to constrain the focus of individuals. It's not a you're doing it or you're not doing it. We're always doing it because we're organisms. So yes, what are
And
your
also,
thoughts?
I also think from our like goals with this podcast is to explore the ecological approach through life and experience. So, yes, we are very purposefully not talking necessarily about all the other ways of work. We are always taking the approach that we take with how we are explaining other approaches. We're not exploring it through indirect perception because why? Because the purpose of this podcast is not about exploring everything. We'd never get anything done.
No.
Like we'd be in so much trouble if we explored it from every single approach and which approach is more or less or etc. For us, the ecological approach makes sense.
And to be honest, if we were to take an indirect perception approach, I'd have to learn so many different models and frameworks and theories and go back to how many years of science that is still believed, which, like, no, thank you. Like,
And
learning
many pieces of
styles,
it have been disproven, but is still
rife.
used.
Hmm. And what's interesting to me is if you're a teacher, educator, learner, and you focus on the not the words and the terminology used by educators talking about this, but look at the meaning behind uh, the behaviors that they're describing, a lot of the behaviors that are more effective are closer to the ecological approach of explanation than traditional approaches of explanation, but they are using traditional approaches of explanation to justify the behaviors, which isn't wrong, because you can justify ecologically driven practice through traditional approaches. Where it falls short a lot of the time is when you go really deep and try and look at the assumptions that they're building from, which would then typically impact what they do afterwards, after that one practice, what they do next. Oh, we now need to do the fundamentals of the next one. Ah, that's where I disagree. So
Mm.
you can pick a practice and go, yeah, that's more ecologically driven and explain it through both sides. But what they do next, that one might not be as ecologically driven. An ecologically driven practitioner will have ecologically, like the ecological approach will be seen throughout their practices, multiple practices, not just the one or the couple over there. Uh, and so the teachers that I've seen that are talking about cognitive load theory and direct instruction and working memory models, if I ignore the models that they're using to explain the behaviors and I look at the behaviors, what they tend to encourage are behaviors driven typically by the ecological approach, or I would explain it through the ecological approach, and they don't map directly to all the other things they talk about, which is why they try and add on this, oh, and the active inference research, or oh, and the Bayesian hypothesis stuff, and oh, the free energy principle. But when they get to that point, a lot of the time it's, I don't understand this, or I don't have expertise in this, or this gets really complicated. And that's because of the assumptions that the explanation of the behaviors come from. If you forget about the explanation of why the behaviors work and just look at the behaviors, well, now you're suggesting to do the same things we are suggesting to do from the ecological side. I'm putting sides here because that's the way it's pitched in social media. Uh, but we're talking about the same stuff. We're encouraging the same stuff. But for whatever silly reason, so, well, yeah, it is a silly reason, society decides to pitch people against each other because of the explanations, which I get frustrated at. And that's part of what I'm going to try and do with these videos on Coach Danny Hatcher. Yes, I added my last name to it because I kept typing in Hatcher at the end of it. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to change the channel name, Coach Danny Hatcher, sorted, easier.
Yeah, because then it's actually findable really quickly.
Yeah, because Coach Danny, there's another Coach Danny.
There's like three of them.
Oh, have you found them as well then? Ah, yes.
And I think you nail it right there with the then we start adding more complexity and now we don't understand and now we can't understand and we're not able to understand and we don't have expertise. So we're going to have to go through all of these labels and then define all these labels and then we're going to have to go through more of those labels to define those labels and then labels upon labels upon labels upon labels upon labels. But really, we don't.
So I wanna add to this conversation and be a bit of a devil's advocate right now. Invariant, invariance. What are your thoughts on the terms?
Cool.
The reason I ask is in the BJJ submission grappling martial arts world, invariance and invariant are the new buzzwords that are going around, and they are becoming the cognitive load theory buzzwords. Affordance is where it used to be at. Affordances and constraints, and that sort of died
Yeah,
down, and
but
now we're
they're
at.
too boring. That's the problem. Like, but they are so fundamentally simple that I can use those terms with people who are not interested in the ecological approach. Constraint. What do you think of constraint? Oh, a thing that's limiting the blah 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 that influences what I do. Like, yeah, cool. What's an affordance? I'm not entirely sure. Okay, what does it sound like? Well, it's something that I'm to have an affordance is to have an opportunity to do something. Okay, cool, great. Let's start with that. Like, they are simple words overall.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when
Obviously,
you start using
complexity is
things like,
added later.
yeah, yeah, of course. But then when you add things like invariance and variable, and I'm just like, basically, let's just say things change. Things are forever changing because that's we can all agree on that. I don't see the point. Like I genuinely, from a studying point, from a philosophical discussion, sure. But I don't know anyone who would say that we don't have variations in everything we do all the time. Most people would agree that like everything is every single time you do something, it's different, right? Yeah, cool. That's all it is.
Some people would disagree, and they'll try and like find straw man arguments, which like when you say, well, when I push a letter on a keyboard, it's always the same output. I'm like, yeah, but your behavior to push the letter on the keyboard, like, yeah, and you can go back and forth on it. So they try and find things that are slightly different. But so that takes a bit of teasing out because I think there is an assumption there that, oh no, there's a motor program that I'm doing it. They don't use motor program, but no, once I've got it, I've got it. But yes, I agree. The thing that's interesting for me following these conversations in the grappling martial arts world is invariant, and invariance is used as a thing that doesn't change in order to do a movement. So in order to do this movement, you need to do these things. And the way I try and describe this to other people that I've spoken to, using trampoline as an example, of course, because most of the people I speak to are in trampoline, or they are now. They arms is a big thing in trampoline. Your arms need to be up. Your arms need to be up. Your arms need to be above your head. And I say, well, what if you've got someone that doesn't have any arms? You go, what do you mean? It's like, what if you've got someone that's like amputated arms? What would you get them to do? Well, obviously they can't put their arms up. Obviously, because they don't have any arms. Well, so why do you have to put your arms up? Well, because it helps them go over. Yeah, but if you could do it without any arms, if someone can do a somersault with no arms, why do you have to put your arms up? And they get stumped. And some people would argue, in trampoline anyway, that arms up is an invariant, but it's not. You can do it without arms. And so invariance is far more specific than I feel a lot of the conversations are having. Um, I don't know enough about the moves in grappling because a lot of the conversations that I'm seeing inside of the Discord, for those that are listening, that are in the Discord, you're using labels of moves, and I don't understand what the moves are. And you because there's a lot of jargon in the grappling world, and there's jargon used in the Discord, I get lost because it's not movement conversation, it's sport conversation. I, I hopefully, when I explain moves, apart from earlier when I said tuck, pike, and straddle, when I explain moves, it's moves that you can visualize. You can visualize the movements. Like I was just saying, arms up when you're jumping on a trampoline. I imagine most people can visualize that.
Yeah.
If I was to say, um, you need to drive your shoulders up in a somersault, that I imagine would be harder to visualize, but that would be in trampoline an invariance. But driving your shoulders up isn't actually useful. What you really want to do is rotate round something. If a somersault, an invariance in a somersault is rotation, forwards rotation or backwards rotation. Where does that come from? And again, this is where the coaches could go, oh, well, it comes from your feet. It comes from your hips. It comes from your shoulders. It comes from your body. It comes from your head. It comes from your arm. It can come from any of those places. And that's the thing. Invariance. Well, how do you use that? What do you pick? What movement do you pick? What solution are you picking? Because some solutions will be different. Because if you're doing a somersault that is straight, the invariance will differ. Like, because there is variability within the invariance. So why are we using the words? Why not just describe the behavior? That's the way I look at it. And so I think even in the ecological approach, people are leaning towards using these complex words and terms that aren't necessary. Are they
Yeah.
can they be useful? Yes. Are they necessary? No. And
Yeah.
I think it falls back to the commentary that I made on the warm up, the basketball warm up. about using repetition without repetition, Bernstein's ideas, and um, oh, this is perception action coupling. It's not wrong, it's not right, but I don't think it's useful.
Mm.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
I agree. You can spend a lot of time thinking about the words and thinking about the things and trying to create the best label possible, or you can just do things,
I mean,
which
Nike
I
got it
think is,
right. Just do
huh?
it. Nike got it
Yeah,
right. Just do it.
yeah, because it works. Because you're doing the thing. If you're doing a thing, you're doing a thing. You're acting and you're
Hmm.
perceiving. Well, you are perceiving.
Yeah.
That we are perceptive organisms, we are perceptive systems, we are that's it. That's it. We perceive.
Yep.
Yay! Our
So,
capabilities are different. Yay!
so I'm curious, how is the coaching through or coaching with the ecological approach gone? How are you finding it?
It's become very simple in a weird way.
Right. Why weird way?
Well, not in a weird way. It's just different.
Okay. How different? How is it different? Because obviously it's going to be different because you've taken a different approach. If it wasn't different, I'd be worried.
Um, I find myself asking for when we had our like the practice thingy bobby.
Role play.
Yeah, that's it. See, labels stupid. Um,
I knew what you meant.
exactly. Point made. Um, it has been interesting because it's less, let's look at the problem in detail and depth and how many levels and layers of it there is, and more, what are you trying to achieve?
Yep.
Like, what is your intention? Okay, what's happening? Like,
Yep. Yeah, it's not. I've said this a few times at trampoline recently. It's not difficult. I think people try and make it harder than it is.
yeah.
And I say people, that's me included.
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm not saying I'm perfect because I certainly am not. And there are areas where I'm like, nope, I could say overthinking, but I'm not well, because overthinking assumes there's an underthinking. So I'm not overthinking. The way that I've been using overthinking in my language is, and I'm making sure the meaning behind this is consistent. I'm overthinking in that I'm paying attention to more things than there's necessary.
Mm,
It's not negative, it's not positive, it's just a waste of energy.
mm,
So when I say I'm overthinking some elements of the channel because I'm paying attention to so many pieces of information, adding complexity to the task, which isn't necessary.
mm.
And so
It's been really interesting because I'm also doing a similar thing. So, coming the business world right now, well, world in general is a bit nuts right now.
when is it not?
Yeah, it's just
Life?
now more obvious for more
Depends where you're
people.
looking.
True. You just felt like being an arse.
Yep.
Cool. Love it. Okay. Politics is being paid a lot of attention to in this moment by
American
more people.
politics, yeah. Yeah.
American politics. There we
Yeah.
go. Which has a big influence on the business world.
A certain character is drawing attention to themselves.
Yeah. Um, and so a lot of the business world is freaking the absolute F out. Because things are changing and America has a big influence on many things. And so a lot of it is like, well, how do we do business in this climate.
Mm.
And so it's like, okay, cool. Well, what can we do? Well, we can continue trying to do it the way we've done it all before, which is probably not going to work in the same way because have got a little chaotic.
But things are always changing.
Yes, but things can't. No, they're not changing. They stay the same all the time.
The only constant in life is change.
Oh, ain't it just? And so it's like, well, what do I want to do? So I have been playing around with some ideas, and one of those ideas is actually running. Because for me, a lot of my coaching was I had a perceived notion that they need to be very in depth all of the time, all like we're meeting all the time, every week, multiple times. Like the frequency had to be high and we had to go deep and all of this stuff. And then for me, after our conversation recently, I'm like, but if I'm touching on intention, that's that's interesting because it's less complex, but also complex. But there is less eff not even effort. There is less effort from my point. It's what's your intention? Like what are you trying to achieve? Oh well, I'm not sure. Okay, cool. What are you doing? I'm doing this. Is it what you want to do? No. Okay. So there's something there that you want to do. What is that? Oh, it's this. Okay, cool.
Yeah, you get there very quickly.
Yeah, and it's a very quick, rapid thing. So I'm like, okay, cool. What are people struggling with? Community. Like in my world, there is a severe need for more community of like-minded people coming together and just not and just feeling feelings. So it's like, cool, I can provide that. That's quite easy to do. Fun. Everything's really hard. Things feel really hard. Okay, cool. Well, can I do anything about that? Oh, wait, hang on. We can go and explore a entirely fantasy world where we can just go play and have fun. Okay, cool. I can do that too. Okay. But also, I can coach through that because it's just experience. So there will be moments where actually, and one of the questions I ask in D&D is, so what is your intention? What are you trying to achieve? I am actually asking that question when they're rolling dice. Like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, what is your intention with this? And I'm like, oh, that would be cool. So basically, that's what I'm doing. I'm trying something different because I love running D&D and it's fun and it's a game and it's a safe environment to explore complicated feelings and emotions and stuff that happens. And then there is the coaching on the side because the coaching on the side and what I do with people is very simple, in fact, because you, yeah. And so I'm playing with that.
So with the questions and getting to the answer quickly, I was asking a lady that I coach. They were trying to do a skill, and I said, "Do you think you need what was it? Oh, they said I can't do. I think it was a pike front somersault. So it's a front flip and a pike shape, legs together,
Mhm.
and straight. And I said to them, "Does it feel fast or slow?" And they said, "Oh, it's really fast and it's quite low." It's like, oh, okay. So what do you think what do you think could help? And she was like, "Oh, we're going higher." I was like, "Okay, can you do that? Well, how do I do that?" I was like, "How do you jump higher?" Well, I just jump higher. It's like, yeah. Like, yeah, that's the answer. She was like, is there anything else? It's like, jump higher and see what happens. She jumped higher and she did it. Uh, and it's sometimes I feel like the learners ask me because they're looking for me to give them an answer to something. Like, oh, you need to do this more, or you need to do that more, or you need to do this less. And I'm like,
I have had constant frustrated reactions from my children when I go, how could you? Oh. It's like, why don't you just tell me what to do? I'm like, because that's not the darn point. Because
I find it once they've found out the solution, they then want something else. They're like, oh, there's got to be a secret to this because it's not working. I'm like, um, you gotta try. You can't just do it once and say, no, it didn't work.
Mm,
That's just practice.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I think people are progressing quite quickly in Eastbourne Trampoline, which is fun. And why I think it, when I look at the other people that are using the ecological approach in various ways, people progress fairly quickly up the performance ladder because they're achieving the goals that they set out, because they
It was
know what the
interesting.
goal is.
It was interesting watching your Magnuson. Is it Carl Magnuson?
Magnus Carlsen,
Magnus Carlsen. There you go. I got there in the end.
the chess one.
Yeah, the chess one. I did watch that. I was like, yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. The complicated, fun is complicated.
Was that in that video?
Yep.
Yes, it was. Yeah, that was fun. Yes, that was fun.
So
Which I resonated very much with because the first thing when I got the two, so I had the two pieces of drills for my voice training that I had to do. I'm like, well, what if I just try and combine them? Like, what if I did resonance and open quotient at the same time? What would that look like? 'Cause that was what I was intrigued by because
okay.
that is the two pieces of what makes a feminized voice. And then I'll develop it myself. Well, once you get there, then we'll have more things to explore. Then you'll have a voice you can actually use. And I'm like, then why am I doing stuff that I can't? Let me. It was at that point I reacted with, okay, so I'm here for voice training. You're telling me that up until now I can't use it. Well, I want to use it. Gimme. That's the point.
Yes. The so complicated, the 11 fun factors, that word complicated, I shifted, well, I altered the words of the 11 fun factors to make it spell out complicated. And games, like actually play the game, like game time, actually do the thing, actually play the sport. Um, and when when I go through it, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I can think about these things, and I'm curious. I'm trying to work out how to word it without giving you like making you pay attention to something. So when when you watched the video and saw the complicated bit, where where did your attention go in that? Was it a certain word or the whole word? Like, what caught your attention the most, if any?
When talking about complicated.
Yeah, when complicated came up, was there anything that caught your attention? Was it me signing? Was it me talking? Was it the word
Oh yeah, I
itself?
did notice an awful lot of signing in there. I was like, oh, that's really cool. You're signing. Yay. I did enjoy that.
Okay,
Um, but I like when you said complicated, I was just like, yeah, that makes so much sense. Like my I was just like going, yeah, I like complicated. I like things to be complicated. It's fun. It is just fun. When things are complicated, I have more fun. Like it is just enjoyable. I'm like, yeah, heck yeah, give me a complicated problem. Like running D&D, for example, is really damn complicated. There are so many I have got to connect, like up to six very different people sometimes, and dynamically work within that. It's fun. Yes.
good. Yeah, no, it's because the D right at the end, desirable difficulty. That's the hardest. That's the number one thing that people wanted in the 11 fun factors, desirable difficulty. They wanted to try hard. And I was like, how do I make try hard the emphasis of these 11 fun factors for coaches to pay attention to, with it being one, right at the end, and
Mm.
two, being fairly obvious, like people want to try hard. I was like, I'll make the word complicated because fun is complicated. It's not easy. Making a practice session fun is not easy because
Yeah.
it involves all these different things.
Yeah. Which links back to kind of what I've been thinking about with this new magical coaching thing that I'm creating. Like, fun is not often done in the coaching world in business anyway. It's like, oh no, man, look at your KPIs and OKRs and LMNOPs and all of this and all of that and all of that. Like,
Fun's
stuff.
complicated.
Hmm?
Fun's complicated.
Yeah. And it is just fun. And so adding that fun in there is going to be enjoyable.
I mean, the clothes part probably wouldn't be relevant in business. I don't know.
Hmm.
C, clothes, swag, like feeling part of a group or a community by wearing,
Actually, that is.
I guess,
So
branded.
something that I'm thinking about, yeah, so branding. So as part of this offer that I'm creating, every single member, because it's only 6 people, it'll only be up to 6 people to that join. They'll all get a an adventurers pack, which will have a journal,
Yeah.
um, with custom artwork that my other half will create, like a set of unique dice that's like metal proper. So yes, that is the clothing. So yes.
Yeah. So I guess here's a question for you. You probably won't remember many, but I'm curious to see which ones you do. Going through complicated, the word complicated, because obviously it's an anagram. What other ones came up? So C was clothes.
Mm,
O,
no.
M,
Was it money?
no.
No,
P.
no. Oh, was it persistence?
Uh, that was some of the words I was using, but yeah, kind of. Practice time.
Oh, practice time. Yeah, that makes sense.
L.
No,
So I thought that one would be really easy to remember. I.
I need to go watch that video again.
Well, most people won't remember it because they're not thinking about remember it. That was improvement. C.
Creativity.
No.
I'm
A.
I'm just picking random words now.
L.
Um, achievement?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it was an achievement, but it's close. Yeah. T.
Time.
No. I spent so long trying to work out how to make mistakes into a T. Troubles and trials.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
E.
Expertise.
Everyone involved. Uh, and then D, which I told you earlier.
Desirable difficulty.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. So the the complicated like anagram I will probably use again, because obviously first time around people aren't going to remember it because they're not going to be thinking about it. Uh, but if coaches want to be making things fun, I think following those 11 fun factors is the way to do it. I mean that's my philosophy.
Mm,
Um, but yeah,
that's cool.
and to be clear, I wasn't expecting you to remember any, to be honest. Um, the only one I was thinking about was the L because that's what the emphasis in the Magnus video is on loyal friends.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, anything else you want to bring up?
Nope. All good.
Hmm. Um, talk to you all next week. Bye.